Hello, everyone. It's 1 p.m. Eastern, and that means it's time to begin our 76th CoCoRaHS Weather Talk webinar. A very warm welcome to all of you joining us today. I'm your host, meteorologist Henry Regis. Running the technical side of our program is our very own Noah Newman. We're coming to you live from sunny Fort Collins, Colorado. For those of you who are unable to join us for our live broadcast, we are recording today's talk, and it will be available later this week on our website. All of our Weather Talk webinars are sponsored by the generous donations of listeners just like you. Well, today's webinar is about the windiest place on Earth, the Mount Washington Observatory. Have any of you visited the observatory up to the top? Let us know. Well, our guest today is Brian Fitzgerald, and he is the Director of Science and Education at the Mount Washington Observatory with offices located in North Conway, New Hampshire. Brian oversees Mount Washington Observatory's mission-focused areas of weather observation, research, and education. Prior to his role, Brian served as a Mount Washington Observatory Winter Summit intern. Wow, that must have been quite an experience, and weather observer, educational specialist. Additionally, Brian has served as Blue Hill Observatory's chief weather observer in Milton, Massachusetts, and that's just south of Boston. Brian holds a BS from the University of New Hampshire in Environmental Conservation Studies and a Master of Education in Science Education from Boston University. Outside of work, you can find Brian hiking, mountaineering, trail running, skiing, and staring at the clouds. He currently resides in North Conway, New Hampshire. Well, let's give a big CoCoRaHS welcome to Brian. Brian, it's great to have you with us today.
Hey, thanks so much for having me, Henry. Thanks everyone for joining. It's a real pleasure.
Well, I'm going to ask you the same question we ask all of our guest speakers, and as we start things off, and that is, how did you become interested in weather?
Yeah, well, that's a great question, and one we ask a lot of our colleagues here too. It's a little bit of nature, a little bit of nurture, probably. My dad holds a degree in meteorology and oceanography. Went to a merchant marine academy, so certainly had the very similar interest. But I mean, it goes all the way back to being a little kid and uh, experiencing those thunderstorms, being right next to the window, being both thrilled and terrified of the thunder and the lightning nearby, and being excited about whether or not school would get canceled because of the big snowstorm that was coming, and whether or not we'd get to go outside and play. And growing up in Southern Connecticut, we got to see a little bit of everything. So this is a dream come true, getting to be involved with the Mount Washington Observatory.
Yeah, that is a great job indeed. Well, I'll let you take it from here, and then we'll see you at the end of your talk. We'll come
That
back.
sounds great. Thank you, Henry. All right, well, I'll go ahead and share my screen. Everyone should be seeing a screen over here now, sharing some of the current conditions on top of Mount Washington. Now, as Henry mentioned, at our administrative offices, it's down in North Conway, New Hampshire, a good 20 miles or so south of the summit, at about 500 feet of elevation. That's where I'm speaking to you from today, though did have a brief visit on the summit yesterday. Our current conditions here, we can see right now, winds are about 58 miles per hour sustained, gusting to about 69 miles per hour in the last 10 minutes out of the northwest, making for some chilly conditions. Currently only 24 degrees on the summit at the moment. So if you're not dressed properly, there's a wind chill factor of about 2 degrees above zero. And in the last 24 hours, we've seen a gust of 94 miles per hour come through with the most recent cold front here. So rain yesterday, transitioning to snow this morning, about almost a half inch of snow overnight. Good amount of precipitation, half inch of liquid and liquid equivalent precipitation there just yesterday. And right now we are in the fog, and since it's below freezing, we have freezing fog occurring at the moment. So certainly some rime ice accumulation taking place. And taking a look just briefly, here's our Autoroad vertical profile. We have remote stations going from the base of the Mount Washington Autoroad, our main way of getting up the mountain, about every 1,000 feet or so, measuring at minimum temperature and relative humidity. And we can see just around at the base there, around 46 degrees, and a pretty classic setup with some adiabatic cooling going on Normally speaking, this is the setup where in North Conway right now, it's in the low 50s, and on the Rockpile at the summit there, it's in the mid 20s. So usually a good 30-degree difference on a given day. So nothing too surprising going on there. Real quick, I'll show you a look from one of our webcams here. This is a look from our observation tower webcam looking down onto the observation deck for any of you who have been fortunate enough to visit. And we see lots and lots of white and gray. Lots of that freezing fog at the moment and lots of rime ice surfaces, no matter what, including you if you are out there right now. So taking a look at where our observers go out every single hour to take a weather observation. Now, visibility is only about 1/16 of a mile. That means we can only see basically to the end of the deck there. We can see a deck railing. Let's see, this is another webcam we operate on Wildcat Mountain, just across the notch. For any of you skiers out there who've skied over at Wildcat, this is a nice view from a 4,000-foot peak looking into the side of the eastern side of Mount Washington, this being Huntington Ravine with some snow left in some of these classic ice climbing and skiing routes that exist in this ravine. And our Wildcat webcam, which for those who are members of the observatory can get special access to some of these live streaming webcams, which is pretty cool on a day like today where Mount Washington is going to end up being one of the few mountains in the clouds for today. So turning into a nice day, otherwise a windy one in the rest of northern New England. So I will stop sharing that webcam and I will pull up my presentation for today. I'll go ahead and swap screens here. Alrighty, so as Henry said, my name is Brian Fitzgerald. I'm the Director of Science and Education at Mount Washington Observatory, and I'll talk to you about all things Mount Washington Observatory today and try and leave lots of time for some questions at the end, since I definitely won't be able to get to everything. But for those of you who are unfamiliar, Mount Washington Observatory, we are a private, nonprofit, member-supported institution. Our mission focuses on advancing the knowledge of Earth's weather and climate. And we do that through a few different focus areas, one being our weather operations, being our weather observations and forecasting services on the mountain, research and product testing projects for sure, and also educational programs. I will emphasize again, we are a member-supported private nonprofit organization. Some of the most common misconceptions about the observatory being that we are a part of the National Weather Service. We do hold a contract with the National Weather Service for our data services. However, we are a private group and we do get support. Our annual operating budget comes from a wide variety of different things, from educational program fees, running our museum, donations, sponsorships, contracts, grants, etc. So all across the board for those of you who are familiar with nonprofits. And the other big misconception is that we own Mount Washington or property on Mount Washington. And unfortunately, or for better or for worse, we do not own any property on Mount Washington, although we have existed on the summit since 1932. You can see some images of our buildings over the years. The top of Mount Washington is owned by the state of New Hampshire. It is uh, contained within New Hampshire State Park, and they are our landlords. So we are housed now currently in this building that kind of looks a little bit like a spaceship on the bottom right-hand corner image here. And so we moved into that building in 1980 and occupy one small space. And while the building was built with us in mind, we do pay rent to exist in this building and utilities besides. But going backwards, prior to that, we were in what was referred to as the old house, so to speak, another nickname for this building that existed from 1937 to 1980 was called the strongest wooden building in the world, which hard to qualify that one, but it was made and donated to us by the Mount Washington Cog Railway, with many of their Cog Railway rail timbers that made this just a total bear to try and take apart and demolish when it came down in 1980. Um, and prior to that, the building that saw and recorded the 231 mile per hour world record wind gust back then was the Mount Washington Stage Office, owned by what is now the Mount Washington Auto Road, another private operator on the mountain. There's a replica of this building that exists on the mountain, but from 1932 to 1937, this is where we're originally housed. And you can see our four founding members who helped get the observatory started right smack dab in the middle of the Great Depression, which is quite the feat. Observers who were on the mountain for a month or longer at a time per shift. We're not paid anything, and we're thankful enough just to be able to have room and board covered for their hard-earned work. So a little bit more generally about the climate of Mount Washington, the typical weather here, year-round, our station averages 35 miles per hour, which makes it at minimum the windiest location in North America and right up there worldwide. Although comparison against other very windy places is difficult because, well, it's difficult to measure those windy locations, especially if they're like us, very cold, wet, and windy. Year round, we are averaging below freezing, 27 degrees, although our new normals just came up. So something tells me that number is just a little bit warmer now. And our annual average snowfall, certainly there are snowier places throughout the world, but we average about 281 inches of snowfall, which is um, quite a bit for New England. Down here in North Conway, we will average less than half of that amount. So for year-round liquid precipitation is right around 100 inches. It is almost exactly half, 50 inches that fall throughout the year down here in North Conway. And if you've ever visited the summit of Mount Washington, or if you intend to, you have a 60% chance that you will visit when the summit is in the clouds. So very, very foggy conditions throughout the year. Now, let's see. So we use the tagline, home of the world's worst weather, or maybe, well, we kind of started to embrace this because it wasn't necessarily something that we were arguing for. In fact, this phrase goes back to the 1930s when one of the founding members of the observatory wrote an article suggesting, arguing, in fact, that this likely was not the case, not the home of the world's worst weather, and certainly a subjective statement. But the argument certainly can be made that the frequency of cold, wet, and windy conditions, often all at once, make this a very, very challenging place to live and work. And so the question you might be wondering is, well, why? Why do these conditions exist? Why is the climate like this on Mount Washington? And here are some of the factors that we'll talk about. So for starters, from a topographical standpoint, Mount Washington here is the tallest peak in the northeastern United States, one of the tallest east of the Mississippi, but you have to go another 1,000 miles in at least every direction before you find another peak that is taller than Mount Washington. So that prominence that we have above all other land masses or even man-made structures is naturally going to subject the summit of Mount Washington to the free flowing troposphere um, oftentimes. So, and given that our prevailing wind direction is usually from the west or has some sort of westerly component, there is a long stretch, or I guess fetch to use a nautical term here, in which air can move unimpeded before it hits the summit of Mount Washington. Now, the topography and in fact the unique shape of the White Mountains of New Hampshire also come into play here, with that prevailing wind direction usually having some sort of westerly component. Oftentimes, winds are funneled through some interesting shaped notches throughout the White Mountains here, and in fact, the presidential range, which runs from Mount Washington being sort of smack dab in the center of it, all the way up to some other 5,000-foot peaks just to the north, and then the southern presidentials just to the south, this long ridge line along the way here that I'm pointing to with my mouse, oftentimes serve as a nice funnel to push winds up and over the ridge line here on Mount Washington. But that said, we've still recorded wind gusts in excess of 100 miles per hour from all cardinal wind directions in all months of the year. Now, not only is it windy sometimes or stormy sometimes, it's stormy frequently in New England. Lots of adages out there, including one that I'll butcher from Mark Twain. But if you don't like the weather in New England, wait a minute, it'll change. And that's because of the frequency of low pressure storm tracks. And this is an image here put together a few years back with our now last climatological set of norms from 1981 to 2010, these are the most common low pressure tracks. And it doesn't really matter at the end of the day whether they come through the Pacific Northwest, originate in the Rockies, come up from the Gulf of Mexico, or along the eastern seaboard. More or less, most systems are going to move through the northeastern United States. So we see a lot of disruptive weather very frequently. So that certainly adds to the typical weather on Mount Washington. Now, for those of you who have stood on top of a mountain peak and felt the full force of wind on top of those mountains, compared with down the valleys, there's also another effect that's sort of taking place that's specific to the mountains, and that one being the Venturi effect here. So, if you've ever put your thumb over the end of a garden hose and seen the water suddenly start to accelerate at a faster pace, more intensely out of the end of the hose, well, sort of the same thing is taking place here. Air and water are fluids, so instead of water, we'll talk about air here. It doesn't matter at what elevation, eventually, uh, air is going to be forced up and over the side of a mountain. It doesn't just stop. And when it's forced up over the mountain and is then squeezed between a smaller space between the summit of a mountain peak and the upper layer of our troposphere called the tropopause, it will be forced into through a smaller space and therefore will accelerate as it moves through that space. So we have a number of different factors at play. uh, that will make this a very frequently cold, wet, and windy location, which subjectively you can certainly make the argument is a pretty bad place, maybe even the worst place for weather, depending on your disposition. So for our weather observers, whose year-round 24 hours a day, 7 days a week schedule, they have a variety of tasks and responsibility on the mountain, and you can see the focused areas here. So that weather operations, education, and research, of course, being the focus areas of the observatory. Now, we employ 6 full-time weather observers that help us record the weather around the clock throughout the year, going outside every single hour of the day to conduct and complete a manual weather observation, which is certainly unique for really anywhere globally these days, since most weather observations are compiled through automated weather sensors. Though, for those of you who participate in CoCoRaHS, you are part of that unique group of people who are using human verification um, in addition to using some instrumentation here. So very similar stuff going on. And so for our observers, we have 2 different shifts. So there's 3 observers on the mountain at any given time. Wednesday is usually being our shift change day. So they'll stay up for a week at a time and then have a week off. And on each shift, we have 2 daytime observers and 1 night observer, and they will take turns taking those weather observations each hour, storing that weather data within our own internal databases, but also submitting those observations and sending them to the National Weather Service and National Centers for Environmental Information. Now, many of you, being either CoCoRaHS volunteers or perhaps weather enthusiasts beyond that, you may know what goes into a typical observation, and so many of these things won't surprise you. But these are just some of the variables that are being measured within the span of a weather observation. When we're talking about a weather observation, we're talking about essentially a 2-minute snapshot of the current state of the atmosphere outside on top of Mount Washington. So temperature, relative humidity, wind speed direction, air pressure, precipitation, and a variety of other variables, all being captured, absorbed both internally by humans, but also by our instrumentation as well, and then submitted each hour. And so for our thermometers, we still employ glass thermometers, either filled with mercury or alcohol. And on the left-hand side, you can see our observer, now our Director of Summit Operations, Rebecca Schoen here. She's using a sling psychrometer. And unfortunately, I don't have a closer image of this, but essentially what it is, we have 2 glass thermometers that are right next to each other. One of them has a cotton sock at the end of it, and we dip it in water before we go outside, and we spin this thing round and round and round, and we use evaporational cooling or evaporative cooling to get what is called the wet bulb temperature. And then we take the measurement, which is the dry or ambient ambient outdoor air temperature. And through a calculation, we will derive our relative humidity and dew point. And we've been using a sling psychrometer since the observatory's founding in 1932, amassing one of the longest and most consistent temperature records still ongoing in North America. And when we're in the fog or for our maximum minimum thermometers, we're also using here in our thermoshack here, we're still reading by eye our mercury or alcohol thermometers here as well. Now for anemometry, we use a variety of instruments, though not that wide a variety because truthfully, there literally is nothing that is available off the shelf that will work in all conditions on Mount Washington. And that has forced some creative problem solving and engineering over the years. And so, those of you who are very much in instrumentation or have noticed these in the past, probably familiar with an RM Young impeller-driven anemometer. We'll use this in any non-icing conditions and in wind speeds, usually 110 miles an hour or less, something like that. So we'll keep this up throughout most of the summer and in calmer conditions in the winter. But that freezing fog, like I was showing you on the webcam earlier today, is a real nuisance. And that was learned very, very early on in the observatory's founding. And so any moving parts, like an unheated instrument with a propeller in the front of it or a 3-cup anemometer, quickly turns into a block of ice and quickly stops giving you accurate wind data. And so we needed to devise some instruments that could deal with all of that freezing fog. So on the upper right-hand corner, uh, this image here and also the one in the center here, they're both pitot anemometers. So for any aviation enthusiasts out there, a pitot tube is a wind sensing device that aircraft typically employ to measure their own airspeed. We've simply reversed engineered this and let the air come to us to measure airspeed. And we're measuring the physical force, the actual pressure, differential pressure equation to measure how fast the wind is blowing based off of its physical force. So there are no moving parts here. There's just a vane on the back of both of these instruments, so it's always vaning in the right direction of the wind. And the most important thing here is they are super heated. These instruments will get very hot, so hot that you certainly don't want to touch them with your bare hands when they're plugged in. And we have heat tape beyond that. And this anemometer here down the bottom here is what we're calling our next generation pitot anemometer that we are currently wrapping up the evaluation phase of. And this is our latest improvement. These pitot tube anemometers are made in-house by the observatory and oftentimes with the support of other experts in the engineering community. And so no different here. This pitot anemometer was developed with engineers at General Electric and also graduate students at the University of Massachusetts Lowell. Now, in terms of actually storing that wind data, we have a unique wind speed recording device called a haze chart. Essentially, it's on the left-hand side here. Essentially, how this operates is there's a little pen arm that sticks out on this circular chart. This circular chart rotates once per day. So this is 24 hours worth of wind data here. And the closer the pen gets to the outside of the chart, the windier it is. And the more it moves back and forth, the gustier the conditions. And this was from February 25th of 2019, one of the highest wind gusts we've seen in recent memory. Somewhere literally off the chart here was a wind gust of 171 miles per hour, in which we needed to use a backup recording device in addition to our digital database. And so here's an image of some of our digital displays that we've uh, built in-house to also both provide visualization and data storage of our wind speed data. We also employ a number of different barometers, and anything from a National Weather Service sponsored digital barometer on the left-hand side here to our old-fashioned wind-up barographs. So we still have those, and including one of the oldest mercury barometers, probably still in operation today, actually gifted to us by Blue Hill Observatory, just south of Boston there, who operate the oldest mercury barometer dating back to the late 1880s. This instrument a little bit newer, I believe the 1920s, I believe, maybe even a little more recent than that. But that still is our gold standard pressure measurement device at the observatory. Now we'll measure precipitation as well. We measure precipitation every 6 hours on the mountain, and we go outside and we use, well, just bigger, more rugged versions of the plastic tubes that you all use to measure, make your CoCoRaHS measurements. These are standard National Weather Service precipitation gauges here, and this is the most effective and consistent way we've found to measure precipitation on Mount Washington. It's also the furthest our observers will travel from the safety of any building, so sometimes perhaps the most dangerous part of the job. They'll go out and do their best with an empty can to do the swap here, no matter the conditions, with the exception being any lightning threats. And we'll bring this precipitation can inside and record the precipitation and measure it carefully inside and melt down any of that frozen precipitation as well for that liquid water equivalent. Now, at each observation, our observers are using a lot of their human senses, not only to verify some of the automated data that might come in from a digital instrument or analog instrument, but they're also compiling a variety of other variables that are human derived. The uh, first one being visibility, which we'll come back to in just a little bit. But you can see a wide variety of different variables that are being measured, including, believe it or not, determining precipitation types. Uh, Radar is certainly a helpful tool, and going outside, sometimes even using your own two eyes is not quite good enough to determine whether or not it's snowing is a very difficult question to be able to answer sometimes because of the amount of blowing snow that occurs on Mount Washington during the winter months. And so we'll take a piece of plywood with some felt stapled over the back of it, and this is what we call our snowboard. And so if we capture whole flakes on the snowboard in the air, we know that they have not hit the ground yet. They have not broken up. So we can, in fact, say, yes, it is snowing. Or we might find lots of broken flakes and frozen debris there that helps us determine whether or not that's just blowing snow or snow that is falling from the sky. And it's amazing how difficult it can be to tell without a device that is otherwise pretty simple to use. Observers will make sure that they are noting any significant cloud types like the altocumulus lenticular clouds here that form over the Wildcat Maria Ridge, oftentimes just downwind of us, and a number of other significant cloud types. Let's see if I can remember all those at the top of my head, but certainly towering cumulus, cumulonimbus, rotor clouds, which I don't think they're seeing too often, but certainly lenticular clouds and other notable types, and a variety of other atmospheric phenomena will be noted throughout an observation that is being observed directly by our weather observers. Additionally, they'll also derive visibility as well. It can vary quite a bit, especially when clouds are right at station height. So they'll take special note of those things, but can measure or actually see and record up to 130 miles of visibility in the best of conditions. We can see Mount Marcy, the tallest peak in New York State, on the clearest of days on top of Mount Washington. And we'll also note some other interesting atmospheric phenomena. Could be showers in the vicinity. It could be a thunderstorm moving. It could be haze in the distance. A whole variety of different meteorological factors that will be added to the standard weather observation or METAR observation for those of you who are familiar with that language. And a big part of the job is maintenance. Oftentimes, we get the question, why do we need to have human beings on top of the mountain going outside every single hour, staying on top of the mountain? Can't they just go visit once in a while? Wouldn't you save yourselves a lot of headache and expense and all that? And um, maybe we would have, but it's extremely difficult to have this type of weather station be fully automated. You can note here, just even in the left-hand image, there's a tremendous amount of de-icing that needs to occur in the winter months when ice accumulation rates can be almost up to 1 foot per hour in the most ideal conditions for rime accumulation. So even with heated instruments, we still need to go and de-ice sometimes multiple times an hour. And there are a whole host of other maintenance issues that, particularly in the winter months, if they occur, it could be days before you're able to get back up to the station. And I'll show you just what I mean for some maintenance here and some of the more exciting maintenance. I'm going to make sure that I'm sharing our computer sound, not that you need it. And I'm going to share just very quickly what it looks like to do some of these de-icing tasks. And I'll play just a short video here. And so this was during that February of 2019, in which a gust of 171 miles per hour was recorded. So this is even for our very experienced observer here, Ryan Knapp, who's been on the mountain for more than 15 years. He'll go out in some of the most intense conditions out there. Excuse me if you're just hearing a lot of wind static. I promise you it is fully deafening if you are out there in these types of conditions. Observers will go up to the top of this instrument tower in just about any conditions, but in this case, winds were so high, even for Ryan, who probably won't go up into this tower in conditions above 130 miles per hour, they needed to get an extender for their crowbar to be able to knock off the rime ice here. And yes, it is very, very loud when you go outside in those conditions. So you might be curious, well, what exactly is the value of collecting this data so regularly around the clock, 24/7, 365? Well, a lot of these pointers that I have here actually come directly from the National Weather Service themselves. And so for starters, one actually really nice benefit of providing weather observations directly to the National Weather Service every hour of the day is that we actually are able to produce model output statistics. So the National Weather Service return the favor right back to us by providing uh, point, a point specific model for the summit of Mount Washington, which aids our meteorologists who are able to produce a higher summits forecast for the summit of Mount Washington and higher peaks in the region. In addition to that, you can kind of think of Mount Washington like a fixed weather balloon in the sky. As the tallest peak in the Northeast, this is essentially that. It is one of the few locations that has consistent, high quality upper level atmospheric data that is available that has a wide variety of benefits, particularly when you're thinking about uh, events like, say, freezing rain events and trying to forecast even severe weather outbreaks in cases where you would love to have weather balloon data to understand what's happening in the upper layers of the atmosphere. But in addition to that, there's certainly benefits to mountain hydrology, aircraft icing and turbulence information, and aircraft safety. And even more directly, because the White Mountain National Forest is an extremely popular place for recreation, there are a lot of benefits that come from our real-time data and also from our forecasts for recreational users in the area. And so speaking of that forecast, we do produce a forecast. We've been doing this for several decades now, and it's called the Higher Summits Forecast. It's produced twice daily, 5 a.m. and 5 p.m. And we only look out about 48 hours. For a long time, we would only do uh, 24 hours. Then we got up to 36 hours for a time. And now with the improvement of certainly models and the longevity and high quality of the observation data that we're providing, our the model output statistics that we get back uh, do us a great favor when forecasting. And so this is an extremely popular product for those recreationalists, hikers, skiers, climbers, etc., who get into the White Mountains. And unfortunately also for the search and rescue community who need to go out into some extremely challenging conditions, oftentimes to help aid stranded or injured backcountry users. And so even beyond that, the operational decisions that are being made from the Cog Railway, the Auto Road, the state park, the national forest here rely quite heavily on our forecasts. And I picked an exciting example for you. I think this is from earlier in the year. Oh, just a casual day in which winds would be from the west shifting northwest, sustained from 105 miles per hour to 125, with gusts up to 165. Oh, that sounds like nothing, right? In fact, actually, from the same day that we recorded that wind gust of 171 miles per hour. Uh, Pretty darn impressive, if I do say so myself. I am not a forecaster, but I have a great deal of respect for our meteorologists who are able to make some predictions, some very close and accurate predictions in what are otherwise some extreme parameters. Now, our observers and other staff also do take part in a variety of research and product testing projects, and I'll list out some of the research projects in just a little bit. We do a significant amount of testing, both for consumer products and for commercial products, especially in the meteorological community. We're just wrapping up a test right now. This is an image of an old anemometer evaluation, but we're just wrapping up a test right now for the FAA, who are evaluating anemometers for use in locations that see significant icing as well. But in addition to any of those sensors, which you would think if they can survive on Mount Washington, they could survive just about anywhere else. There's some other interesting, sort of more niche consumer products, like even Keurig coffee machines tested their K cups that needed a testing location that had some relatively high elevation. And so certainly Mount Washington can do that for you. And we're able to adjust the pressurization levels that they were using within their K cups, so that consumers probably over in Colorado or elsewhere wouldn't have their K cups explode on them, just like they were doing at first when they came up to Mount Washington. And certainly a great place for testing outdoor equipment and gear, and even robots. We had an interesting visit from Boston Dynamics a few years back, who were trying to test a robot at higher elevation and in mountainous terrain. And so some of those current projects, one that I mentioned there, in fact, a couple I've already mentioned here, both some anemometer evaluation taking place for the FAA and evaluating our own internal instrument, the next generation pitot anemometer there, that's pictured. We are conducting research projects besides, one not listed here. Now we get to dive deeply into our new set of climate normals. We'll be very excited to share with the public uh, how our new climate normals from the 1991 to 2020 climate period compares with the last climate period, the last 30-year period, as we're seeing certainly warming on the summit of Mount Washington and some more intense precipitation events as well. Most recently, we just wrapped up a project looking at our long-term visibility data that goes back around the clock, 24 hours a day of visibility measurements since 1943, and our early findings showing that there appears to be an improvement of visibility over the long term, particularly since the early 2000s. The frequency with which we've been reporting observations where our observers can see in excess of 100 miles appears to be increasing over time. And additionally, we do operate beyond the summit of Mount Washington's weather station, and even beyond the weather stations that run up and down the Mount Washington Auto Road. We do have a regional mesonet in which we operate nearly 2 dozen remote weather stations throughout the White Mountains that aim to gather long-term data in this complex mountainous terrain as well. So in the midst of writing a technical paper, sharing some of the special challenges that our staff face in operating these remote stations. And finally, we do offer educational programs, something I'm intimately involved in. A wide variety of programming that's certainly changed quite a bit, just like in a lot of organizations over the past couple of years. But we've continued the tradition of virtual learning. In fact, we've been in the distance learning game for quite some time now, since 2009. Frankly, just because, well, we've always been a difficult place to get to, particularly in the winter months. So our observers um, do offer educational programs throughout the year to a wide variety of different groups. In addition to that, we host our own uh, monthly lecture series and topics in weather and climate called Science in the Mountains that you can certainly find information on our website about. It's a free lecture series as well. Right now we are in a National Science Foundation funded curriculum development project called WeatherX, in which we're teaming up with curriculum developers to provide Mount Washington Observatory data and help teachers and students throughout rural areas of New England learn data analysis and computational thinking skills by examining extreme weather data, not only on Mount Washington, but within their own communities as well. Very grateful to be able to take part in this project to provide data and expertise and help students learn about what is typical and what is extreme in their own communities while learning some essential skills in graphing and data analysis. And finally, we offer a seasonal museum on the summit of Mount Washington for those folks who will come for a visit. Come find us in the Sherman Adams building. We operate our Extreme Mount Washington Museum there to give folks a taste of what it's like to be up in winter and lots of other programs beyond. And so I will leave it there. I do have some more material and some videos and some fun stuff to share, but I imagine there are some questions out there. So I'm happy to stop sharing my screen in just a moment. Certainly, if you have questions, feel free to add them to the Q&A button on your Zoom screens. For any questions I can't get to today, certainly feel free to reach out directly to me at education@mountwashington.org is the best email to get me at, or you can visit us directly at mountwashington.org there as well.
Ryan,
Thank you
I
all.
think I think we have time. If you do have a few other videos you wanted to show,
Oh, sure.
we're running a little ahead of time, so maybe for the next 10 minutes or so, we could still do those if you are able to do that.
Yeah, sure. So I always have a variety of other media available here. So let me see. Let me get back to my screen for a second.
One thing I do remember, going up there, and we lived right near there as a kid, but the drive up and the drive down on the auto road, you could smell a lot of brake linings on cars. I think what is the grade, the going up and down? Do you know offhand?
I don't know the grade offhand. It is awfully steep. Perhaps some of you might have driven up and down Pikes Peak. That is a little gentler. There are some exceptionally steep grades on the Mount Washington Auto Road. Here's a look at it in two different seasons using two different modes of transportation. Um, we employ in the summer months, which is very convenient for lots of people, we'll take a passenger vehicle up and down the road. No special requirements or skills needed. Just like any of you can go through the toll house and drive up and down the auto road. It gets a little trickier in the shoulder seasons in spring and fall, where we'll transition to 4x4 vehicles. We have a van, a passenger van, and a truck, and we will put chains on those vehicles to go up and down the auto road as long as significant plowing is not needed. Or we'll transition into our snowcat. So we have a snowcat similar to what you might see grooming the slopes of a ski resort with a large blade on the front to help blade the road. These machines are necessary, particularly above tree line where some of the drifts can build to many feet high, put it that way, even if the road's being groomed every single day. So the road here is about 7.6 miles long. Just traversed it yesterday, and trips can take as short as 25, 30 minutes up the road driving. In the summer months, to we've had some exciting or not so exciting experiences sitting in the snowcat for 5, 6 hours one way. So really just crawling, and oftentimes the most difficult conditions to face. Not necessarily the high winds, not necessarily the cold or snow. It's poor visibility. Certainly, the last thing you would like to do is go off the road, especially when there are steep drops nearby. So we certainly take our time when we go along.
Brian, this is Noah with CoCoRaHS headquarters here. I'm just going to use my privilege and ask a question. You just had a slide up on a day in the life showing
Oh, sure.
folks eating and enjoying themselves. And you had also mentioned Pikes Peak in Colorado, in which case we have a famous historic weather station on the top. And there's always fun rumors of in the old days of whether it was the loneliness or the cold, but maybe some questionable weather observations due to maybe trying to stay warm with the bottle, if you will. But I'm just curious if there's any stories of the old timers or rumors even that of the old timers back in the original days.
Yeah, no, that's a good question, and certainly with an institution that stretches back so far, there's a multitude of stories. What's incredible is I'm always I think staff continues to be very, very impressed and inspired by the early crews in the 30s who were paid nothing, stayed up on the mountain, essentially lived there most of the time, even with loved ones, days and weeks away. Um, in brutal conditions. No running water. They'd be melting ice for drinking water. Who knows what the toilet situation was really like, or they had one, wood stove that they burned coal in throughout the winter, and if you were a foot away from it, your drinking water was frozen, and snow would regularly blow in through the seams of the building. Um, but through all of that, there are meticulous weather records that exist, particularly in the early years, and a lot of interest in the summit of Mount Washington, including during World War II, where um, there was a lot of crossover between other groups that came on the mountain during that time, including radio and TV transmission that came later on. The Air Force built a hangar on the side of Mount Washington in the 40s, 50s, and eventually came down, I believe, in the 60s to test aircraft engines. So there's a lot of very serious people on the mountain. That said, uh, there are some whispers here or there of some of the antics that people would get up to. But that being said, you're hard pressed to find questionable or even missing data during a lot of the observations that take place. Here is particularly youthful shots of some crew from previous years in our living quarters. They're not the most luxurious, but compared to the 30s and 40s, certainly very comfortable. It was only in the last couple decades that we removed any of the drinking water or showering restrictions because of water use or any of that sort of stuff. Now, excellent Wi-Fi and power is not an issue. There's power that comes up along the cog railway. That is a buried line that connects us to the grid, and we have backup generators beyond that as well. So pretty comfortable living conditions.
Yeah, this is Henry again. I remember, I guess there's several books out there. Uh, One I remember called 10 Years on the Rockpile or something like that, that does talk about some of the older days and people. I'm sure there's a lot out there that you could recommend, and we could list any of those on our website at the end.
I'd be happy to do that. A number of great books, including from some of the founding observers themselves who talk about the early days, and Mount Washington Reoccupied being one of the books. Mount Washington Observatory actually reoccupied and restarted weather observation that went all the way back from 1870 through the late 1880s. The U.S. Signal Corps, the precursor to the Weather Bureau and now the National Weather Service, ran weather observations for a time as well. So a lot of great writing about the history on Mount Washington.
Brian, do they still, I remember during the 70s when I lived there, they would cut in during the I guess it was Channel 8 at the time. They would go live to the summit of Mount Washington for a quick update. Marty Engstrom was up there and others at the time. And they would give a 3 minute, or not 3 minute, maybe 30-second summary of what it was with a live shot. Do they still do anything like that?
Not now it's all virtual, I suppose. When there's an
Yeah.
interesting weather event, we are fortunate in which um there are a number of media outlets that will reach out, particularly if there's something notable happening on Mount Washington, but it's also funny when there's some very notable events happening in New England, and we get inquiries to say, "Wow, it must be crazy on Mount Washington," and how unexpected, and all this, and oftentimes it's, well, that's actually not too big a deal up here. We're kind of used to it, sort of stuff.
Okay,
But
we'll be
yeah.
quiet for a while. Let you continue.
Oh, that's fine. Well, here's
Yeah.
just a fun videos. There's videos galore. I will preface this because certainly uh, don't want to get in trouble here. Our observers, uh, they're professionals through and through, and they know how to stay safe on the mountain. And that being said, it is still fun. And when it's safe to do so, go play in the winds a little bit. So here's a brief clip, one of our more famous YouTube videos of recent years. These are winds that are about 90 miles per hour sustained. I think a gust of just over 100. And here are a couple observers, and there goes one flying just a little bit, in case you missed that. It is taking a lot of strength and balance to be able to stand up in these conditions. And in this case, the winds funnel just nicely, especially when they're from the northwest like this, across the observation deck. But it's amazing that even once you get just into a little bit of shelter, you can stand up and stand pretty safely while 100 and whatever mile per hour wind speeds are going by you. There is an unofficial club, and I'll talk over this video as I'm playing it. There's an unofficial club called the Century Club with no known registry of members, but if you can walk around the observation deck without falling down, without holding on to anything in winds that are sustained at least 100 miles per hour, you become an unofficial member of said club. And here is one of our observers, Caleb, who is going up from our weather station, and he's going to go climb the observation towers. And so for those of you who don't like heights or open stairs or ladders, the observation tower may not be for you. But this is what observers are doing every hour, sometimes multiple times an hour when conditions warrant heavy icing conditions. And we'll climb up these ladders to the very top of our observation tower to de-ice. And through our cold room here, a lot of data storage, and also for icing experiments, a great place to be able to bring in ice measurements from outside. And through our little hobbit door here, you always got to watch your head. And you are out on the parapet. So you have a wall around you, which will actually block quite a bit of the wind until you get to the very top of our instrument tower here. And so Caleb is using a crowbar. And at first we'll be nice and gentle with our wind vane here to make sure that he can de-ice the instrument. And these are just 60-mile-an-hour winds. So for reference, if you put your arms out wide and you lean gently into the wind should be able to hold you up just enough so that you can kind of completely lay into it. So pretty comfortable conditions for the observers otherwise. But you can see there's even a sonic anemometer that's up on the left-hand side here that is heated. But when the winds are that high and when the temperatures are that cold, all of the heat is just instantly stripped away from these instruments here. So it's remarkable how much power and how much heat it takes to be able to de-ice equipment.
Do you ever break any instruments inadvertently with crowbar? You think, wow, it could happen.
Well, things happen. That
Yeah.
being said, that pitot tube is one of a kind. If someone breaks that,
Yeah,
you are not long for the organization. We'll put it that way.
I understand.
Yes. And so it's a great workout for our observers. It is tedious over time, and but that's what our interns are for, right? And so here again, just another image of the living quarters. Our observers, they don't get a whole lot of downtime when they're on the mountain, but when they do, you know, try and get the creature comforts at home, exercise equipment, lots of reading, video games, cooking, baking, playing music, whatever it may be. And for those who are inclined to get outside, which most of our staff are, a little bit of skiing, hiking, go run the auto road, all those sorts of things. I did mention briefly a little bit about climate change on Mount Washington. This is available on our website. You can go through our norms, means, and extremes page. And this is our annual average temperature since 1935 here. 2020 did feature the 4th warmest year on record. But as you can see, very sort of similar trend, more or less, to much of the US. But what is interesting to note on Mount Washington is while there is statistically significant warming that is occurring, the warming rate is occurring, it's occurring at a slower rate than down in the valleys below. So an interesting phenomena taking place here, and one in which there are uh, some pretty strong hypotheses as to why that's occurring and what makes the summit of Mount Washington so special, but certainly significant nonetheless. And so, generally speaking, in terms of findings on climate change and on Mount Washington, continued warming certainly is expected. Not sure to what extent, because Mount Washington in some ways is defying the warming trends with the rest of the Northeast. That's certainly not to the same extent, though still occurring. But we are seeing other changes, including a much shorter winter season. Snow depth is decreasing, and definitely an increase in the intensity and frequency of winter meltout events. Some of you might be familiar with the concept of the January thaw. Well, these are becoming more frequent and more intense. And recent manuscript that was just submitted should actually hopefully make publication light of day to talk a little bit more about these events that have been occurring on top of Mount Washington. But there's still a lot to be studied. This is one point in the White Mountains, and not a lot of data in a otherwise geographically small area. If you think about these higher peaks of the White Mountains as sort of little islands in the sky, so there's a lot that still remains unknown, and certainly a lot to be learned still about the higher elevations in the Appalachians here in the Northeast. And
Well,
so
Brian, if
let
we
me
could
step
get,
away right there. Yeah.
yeah, if we can get to questions, we've got over 30 questions. So what we'll do is we'll try to hit a few of them. And again, you can follow up with folks afterwards. That would be great. And
Sure.
again, we apologize to everyone, but we wanted to get some more of the presentation in at this point to get that going. There is one question, as long as you have your slide deck. Christopher wrote that you had skipped over an early slide showing the Mount Washington extremes. Could you put
Oh,
that
sure.
back up for a second? It was right. Yeah, I noticed that at the beginning. I think it may have missed or whatever. If that's possible.
Oh,
Appreciate it.
certainly. That was a good catch. I did not
There we
notice
go.
that. There we
So,
are.
yep. Maybe we can leave that up for a minute or two while we answer some of the other questions we've got on here. Andrew writes in and he wants to know, how severe is the lightning on top of the mountain? How frequent, and how is the observatory protected from it?
Yeah, great question. So people think Mount Washington, think winter, high winds, all these other extremes. Lightning is probably the most one of the most dangerous conditions for our weather observers. It's the one scenario in which they absolutely will not go outside if there is lightning in the vicinity. So we do have lightning detectors on the mountain. So our observers are both looking at those lightning detectors and radar as well, with lightning tracking turned on. It's fairly frequent in the summer months. Certainly, there are areas in the U.S. that see more frequent thunderstorms. We see them, every few days probably in the Northeast. Oftentimes in the summer, even just your run-of-the-mill sort of pop-up showers and thunderstorms that occur. Given that Mount Washington is the tallest, pointiest thing around, that is what lightning likes to strike. So it is more likely that the summit will be struck, and it is struck multiple times at least. I'm not aware of an exact count or even a better guesstimate than that, but the building itself is ground using a variety of grounding wires. I don't know exactly how deep. And then in addition to that, one thing that does help us out is there are a few different radio towers that exist on the summit of Mount Washington, and those are a little bit taller than us, so those actually do get struck a little more frequently. But at this point, as long as we stay inside, um, usually no issues for our observers, which is great.
Thanks. Here's one from Robert. He wants to know, do you use any visibility instruments, or is it all visual observations?
So it is all visual observations. We have visibility marker charts that we use to train our observers, and so there is an SOP that goes along with that training. We have tested automated visibility sensors in the past. Um, there still is a challenge. It's challenging in the summer months because of varying visibility, uh, but also in the wintertime. The icing issue is one that would prevent us from being able to properly maintain uh, some sort of automated visibility sensor. But also for consistency, it's great that our observers continue to use their own two eyes.
Thank you. Here's one from Matt, and he wants to know, does the observatory release balloons at all?
Oh yeah, great question. For specific research projects, we will, especially if we want side-by-side comparison with our vertical temperature profile to see the differences between surface-based measurement versus free atmosphere measurement as well. They are awfully expensive, as is helium, so it's not common that we will launch these. Oftentimes, our observers are using the very sparse launches that occur throughout the Northeast through the National Weather Service in Gray, Maine, and Burlington, Vermont, and Cape Cod as well, who are taking a brief pause while they change their station there.
Thanks. Here's one from Hoyt, and Hoyt wants to know, is there hail on Mount Washington? Have you guys experienced hailstones?
Certainly, in some cases, it's almost I don't know if it'd say more common than down in the valleys below, but there are oftentimes just because of being a little higher up in the atmosphere, sometimes it is a little more common that the summit of Mount Washington will see hail. It's very, very rare that we would see anything beyond dime or even quarter size. I can't recall in the last 10 plus years that we've recorded anything beyond maybe dime size hail. So it's usually not very large, but because we're higher up and closer to the colder parts of the atmosphere during a storm like that, we will record that as well.
Thank you. Here's one from Jackie. She wants to know, is there an issue?
Oh, Henry, I think I lost you for a second.
I think I was on mute there. Here we go. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, Jackie wants to know, is there an issue measuring rain or snow with wind sucking, being sucked at, wind with snow, with the wind sucking the snow out of the tube? There we go.
Yeah, so let me see if I can show you that. The image doesn't do it a lot of justice. And certainly if anyone out there knows a better way to measure precipitation with 100-mile-an-hour winds, please give us a phone call. We have, I just passed it here, we have something called a knifer screen, and there are other sort of different devices that are kind of like it, precipitation shields that exist in other areas. This one's pretty simplified, but essentially the precipitation tube will sit down below this funnel. And so it creates a little bit of a low pressure area so that even if precipitation is moving across the can in a horizontal fashion at 100 mile an hour, 100 miles per hour, it will still drop into the can. And then the reverse would be true in so much as because there's a little bit lower pressure that's sitting down there. Once the precipitation is captured in there, it will stay in more or less. What is nice is that, again, it would be one thing if we had these tubes that we just kind of, if it was automated and, we looked at it every 6 hours and just said, okay, well, good enough. Our observers do then take that snow water equivalent of the frozen precipitation. And in cases where there are questionable measurements, if the ratios don't make sense, say it's 0 degrees Fahrenheit outside, and there's a really questionable snow to water equivalent ratio, some of those will get flagged. But oftentimes it's incredible how well this system still works. Unfortunately, there are no automated ways that we've been able to make work for us.
Okay, great. Thanks. I've got several questions on this one here. Marion and others want to know, do you ever use a safety tether in extreme wind conditions? We noticed that folks were out there without them, but do you use that?
Yeah, it's a good question, and one we get frequently. You would think that would be a helpful device that would aid in safety. Um, the opposite ends up being true, because if you do fall, sometimes it can get wrapped around you and actually could pin you in a bad way. For as intense as the conditions may be outside, sometimes we get a question oftentimes, well, are you just going to blow off the mountain? No, not unless you put on a squirrel suit or a kite or something like that. Uh, what will happen though is you're going to get thrown down onto the ground, and it may be uncomfortable for a moment. And that is where the quote unquote crawl of shame can take place, in which you can crawl back to the building and usually find cover pretty quickly. Our observers learn pretty quickly what conditions are appropriate for them to be able to handle. So in some ways, it's a little counterintuitive, but it's better to be untethered on the mountain, if you can believe it.
Amy wants to know if there are currently any pets at the observation center up top. Do you guys bring a dog up there, or you have any pets?
Well, it's funny you should ask that question today. We just announced our newest mascot. The observatory, going back to our founding in 1932, have always kept cats on the mountain. So we've continued that tradition. We've had cats continuously since the 30s. We were sad to see the passing of our last cat, Marty, so named in honor of Marty Angstrom. His passing last November, and today we just announced on social media, and you'll see, go just search the news on Google for Mount Washington Observatory. You will. I don't have a photo of him here, but we just announced the newest arrival, Nimbus the cat, has joined our team on the summit. So they help keep our observers happy, feeling like it's a little bit like home while they're up there, and every now and again doing a little bit of mousing work for us too.
And I guess with Wildcat Mountain being so close, okay, I'll let that one go.
Oh, there's too many cat puns. If for members of the observatory, if they ever get our periodical windswept, our cat writes a pun-filled article every issue.
That's great. I'm into puns, so that's cool. Okay, here's another one. And again, are you okay with time right now?
Oh yeah, sure.
Okay, Nancy wants to know, do the workers cook their own meals, or do you guys hire a cook for them up there?
Oh, they would love a cook. That would be really nice. It's a mix of things. Our observers do cook for themselves, certainly. There's a long tradition of although the observers and even interns and other staff may be on very different schedules throughout the day, every single day our staff comes together and has dinner together. So they do cook for the full team, which could be anywhere from 3 to 17 bunks we have on the mountain. So it could be a pretty big group. But we also do have, we've had in the past, and we'll be looking to restart again, a volunteer program in which members of the observatory will volunteer for a portion or a full shift week, and will help with some tasks. And if they're really into cooking and cleaning and some other construction or other tasks, we do have folks who come up and help cook for our team.
Great. Well, Richard from Wisconsin, and this is a good question, and we do like to help other organizations out. He'd like to know, you have a membership. How can he become a financially contributing member to something like the Mount Washington Observatory? So here's a chance for you guys to plug that.
All right, here I'll do my best pitch here. It's very simple. Go to MOUNT, spelt out, mountwashington.org. In the upper right-hand corner of the screen, you'll see a couple big options, either to donate or become a member. And so you can sign up online, you can give us a phone call. There are annual memberships, there are a variety of benefits that come with that membership, including as we start to open things back up again, tours of the weather station at no cost, free admission to our museum, our periodical, a number of other benefits beside. And if there are other ways you'd like to get involved, certainly it can be through volunteering. And each year we host our largest fundraiser of the year called Seek the Peak. And you can find information for that over at seekthepeak.org, or just search Seek the Peak and you'll find it. It's a big hike-a-thon each year in which you don't even need to hike Mount Washington. You can hike or recreate wherever you'd like and raise funds for the observatory. So certainly we'd appreciate that. And for any questions, again, feel free to reach out to education@mountwashington.org directly if you have any questions about that.
Brian, I'm going to take one more question, for the last one of the day. And again, for those of you who did not get your question answered, Brian will try to catch up with you guys in the next week or so and answer some of those for you. So James in Illinois wants to know how about liquid de-icing, like aircraft stuff? I'm sure that might blow around, but wouldn't that be easier than using a crowbar? He wants to know.
You know, that's a fantastic question. I had a lengthy conversation with someone who works in that industry within aviation, and truthfully, I don't know. I'm not sure if there have been. I'm not aware of any recent experiments with any of that. Perhaps some environmental concern around that, depending on the composition of that fluid. I'm not sure, but that would be a fantastic question. And if certainly you have any specific uh, specific materials or yeah, solvents like that in mind, we're certainly open to testing anything that may make our lives a little bit easier up there.
I'm going to take one more. I just saw this one pop on the screen. It's interesting with all the cats up there. Ellen wants to know, do you have any mice up there? Do you guys have?
You know, the funny thing, we actually have a lot of flying squirrels.
Really?
Yeah, flying squirrels. I thought it was kind of a joke when I hadn't seen flying squirrel before in my life before coming up to the summit, and for whatever reason, they are quite they have quite the population, and they like a lot of rodents or insects like to get inside when things start getting pretty cold, and that's part of the reason why we have a cat, and try our best to seal up the building. And yeah, some years more than others, they can be quite the pests.
And I guess with the wind, they would be flying squirrels, not just regular.
Yeah, yeah, that it seems. I don't know. I have not seen one fly yet, and something tells me that I would be very impressed to see one of those fly at some of these wind speeds.
Well, Brian, thank you so much. We really appreciate you taking the time out. This is fascinating. I definitely want to make a trip up there next time I get up to New Hampshire and see this again. It's a wonderful. If you guys have never been up there, it's worth the drive up. If you have a rental car, better than your brakes. But you could also take the Cog Railway up from the Brenton Woods side, which is on the other side of the mountain. I think that's in Brenton Woods over that area. And it's a fascinating experience. And so beautiful area too of the country, lakes and just a lot of take a vacation up there. That's my plug for New Hampshire on this one. Okay, well, we're going to close out today's program, and we want you guys out there to know that our next Weather Talk webinar will be taking place on Thursday, July 22nd. So that's a little bit, a little more than 2 months from now. It's titled the National Weather Service's Observing Programs, and we'll have Tom Cuff. He's director of the National Weather Service Office of Observations with us. You won't want to miss this one. We'll have our website registration information shortly for you to sign up for it. And before we forget, when signing off today, please take the survey that will pop up on your screen. It's quick, it's easy, and I appreciate you doing that. So until we meet again, stay safe and stay healthy. This is Henry Regis for the rest of the CoCoRaHS team saying goodbye for now and wishing each of you a great rest of the week. Take care.